You're standing at a zebra crossing. The stripes are freshly painted. You wait for a gap. There isn't one, so you wait some more. Finally, you just step out. One hand half raised, the universal signal for please don't hit me, and thread your way between a bus, two motorcycles, and someone completely uninterested in the markings under his tires. By law, that crossing was never a suggestion. It was yours before it was theirs. Almost nobody on that road, including you, most days, actually knows that. What does whose road even mean? A road looks like one surface. Legally, it isn't. It's a stack of separate rights layered on top of each other. A footpath for people walking, sometimes a lane for cycles, and a carriageway for motor vehicles. Each layer has its own rules for who gets priority and in what order. The confusion on Indian streets isn't really about vehicles moving badly. It's about almost nobody being taught what that hierarchy is, including the people whose job it is to defend it. So today, we're going layer by layer. Who does the road belong to? And in what order does the law actually say it should work? Pedestrians. First in law, last in practice. Start with the most vulnerable road user, because the law does too. The rules of the road. Regulations, 1989, made under the Motor Vehicles Act, are explicit. Rule 8 requires drivers to slow down at a pedestrian or zebra crossing. Rule 11 prohibits driving on a footpath or cycle lane. Rule 15 bans parking on or near one. Together, they establish something simple. At a marked crossing, the pedestrian has the right of way, not the driver. This isn't just a traffic rule. In 1985, the Supreme Court's judgment in Olga Tellis versus Bombay Municipal Corporation held that the very purpose of a footpath is to let people go about their day with a reasonable measure of safety, tying the right to walk directly to the constitutional freedom of movement under Article 19, 1d. 4 decades later, in 2026, the Supreme Court said it again, more directly this time, ruling that footpaths fundamentally belong to people and ordering the reopening of pavements encroached by parking, construction, and vendors. And yet, in 2023, pedestrians made up over 20% of all road deaths in India, more than 35,000 people. Not because the law is silent, because on the ground, a crossing painted onto tarmac carries no weight unless the driver approaching it already believes it does. Vehicles. Is the law the same for everyone? Now the vehicles sharing that same carriageway. Are they all governed the same way? Mostly, but not entirely. Every motorized vehicle needs registration, a valid license for its driver, and insurance, regardless of size. That part is uniform. But the moment a vehicle carries passengers or goods for hire, a bus, a truck, an auto rickshaw, it becomes what the law calls a transport vehicle and picks up extra obligations, permits, route restrictions, fitness certificates renewed periodically, and overloading limits with their own separate penalties. A truck carrying more than its rated load isn't just breaking a generic rule. It's violating a specific weight limit tied to the vehicle's registration. Precisely because an overloaded vehicle takes longer to stop and is far more likely to be involved in a fatal crash. Cyclists sit in the strangest position of all. They're legally permitted on most roads, but in most Indian cities, there's no dedicated lane, no separate signal phase, and no real infrastructure built for them, which means the most physically exposed vehicle on the road is often the one given the least specific protection. What Amsterdam solved, and what it Amsterdam didn't start as a cycling city. Through the 1960s and 70s, It was choking on car traffic, like most growing cities. What changed it was a decades-long deliberate redesign. Physically separated cycle tracks, narrower car lanes to force lower speeds, and junctions engineered so a cyclist or pedestrian is never forced to guess whether a driver has seen them. The mechanism isn't really about bicycles. It's about designing a street so that the safest choice and the easiest choice are the same choice. So nobody has to be brave or careful to survive their commute. The honest limitation? This took Amsterdam roughly 50 years and sustained public investment on a much smaller and less dense city than most Indian metros, without anywhere near India's mix of two-wheelers, three-wheelers, handcarts, and buses, sharing a single lane. It's not a template you can lay over an Indian city overnight, but the underlying question is transferable. Is a street designed for its most vulnerable user or its fastest one? India. Specific. What's already working? India doesn't need to import this idea from scratch. It already has working examples, just not widely known ones. Shimla's Mall Road and Gangtok's MG Marg are functioning, long-standing pedestrian zones. No private vehicles, dedicated walking space. And in Gangtok's case, a pedestrianization rate higher than the share of people using motorized transport in that part of the city. And as of 2026, the Supreme Court's ruling gives every Indian city a legal basis to reclaim encroached footpaths, the same way Delhi's authorities began doing immediately after the judgment. The gap isn't precedent. It's that enforcing a pedestrian's right of way runs into a second, equally real right. The Street Vendors Act protects vending as a legitimate livelihood on the very same strip of pavement. Both rights are legal, both need the same shrinking space. The city hasn't been designed to hold both yet, and that's a harder problem than simply picking a side. So, back to that crossing. The stripes were never decoration. They were a right, painted onto the road, that both the driver and the pedestrian were supposed to already know about. Knowing who the road legally belongs to is only half the picture. Next, we look at whether that law is even the same everywhere in India, or whether the rules quietly change the moment you cross a state line. We, the people,